She buried her grief in someone else's guest room until silence became its own kind of scream. They told her to watch her tone, so she watched everything she loved disappear. Now, one forgotten deed, one buried letter, and one wild act of defiance will rewrite what family means. You think this is just about respect? It's about ownership, of voice, of space, of self. When my husband died, the silence of our home became unbearable. It wasn't grief exactly, at least not the kind that's loud in public. It was the quiet kind that seeps into your bones, makes the floorboards creak differently, turns the sound of your own breathing into a stranger's noise. After 3 months of pretending I liked waking up to empty coffee cups and no one to argue with about the news, I sold the house. Griffin said it was the right move. "You shouldn't be alone right now, Mom." He'd told me over the phone, his voice carefully modulated like he was balancing emotion on a tightrope. "There's space here. Delaney and I would love to have you." I should have known then. I arrived on a Monday. The house sat like a magazine spread. Pristine whites, cool grays, and a single burnt orange throw pillow on a couch I would later learn was decorative. Delaney met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Charlotte," she said, pulling me in for a hug I didn't ask for. "You made good time." Griffin stood behind her, hands in his pockets. "Hey, Mom," he said, then took my suitcase before I could respond. No kiss on the cheek, no real look in the eye. They gave me the guest room upstairs. It had twin beds and a dresser with one drawer that stuck. No closet space. A floral painting hung over the bed. Too symmetrical, too intentional. I set my overnight bag down gently like I was trying not to wake a sleeping child. That night, we had lemon chicken with quinoa and kale, Delaney's idea of a light welcome meal. She poured the wine, passed it around, and then commented with a light laugh, "Hope you don't mind, Charlotte. We're more health conscious now. No butter, no salt?" I smiled because I was supposed to. "Of course," I said. Delaney laughed again, this time louder. "Look at her, already adapting. Good girl." Griffin chuckled, sipping his wine like it was water. I froze for half a beat. Good girl? I wasn't a dog. But no one seemed to notice or care, and I told myself not to read too much into it. Over the next week, I learned the unspoken rules of their house. Don't leave dishes in the sink. Rinse, scrub, rack. Don't wear shoes past the front hall. There's a labeled basket for slippers. No candles. No throws on the couch. Don't rearrange anything. Always knock before entering Juniper's room, even if she's not in it. I tried to be invisible, like smoke curling through a room. Felt, but not disruptive. Juniper, my 6-year-old granddaughter, was the only one who broke protocol. She'd sneak into my room early, crawl into my bed without a word. "Your room smells like soap," she whispered one morning. "Mommy smells like lavender and rules." I laughed, then quickly told her to hush. I didn't want Delaney hearing. Dinner was where the dynamics crystallized. Delaney always led the conversation. School events, real estate chatter, boutique sales. Griffin chimed in just enough to stay tethered, while Juniper poked at her food, and I tried not to chew too loudly. It was at one of these dinners, about 2 weeks in, that it happened. Delaney was explaining why she didn't let Juniper watch cartoons on weekdays. "It just turns their brains to mush. Don't you agree, Charlotte?" I hesitated. When Griffin was Juniper's age, he loved Saturday morning cartoons. He turned out okay, didn't he? Griffin smiled faintly. Delaney put down her fork, looked me dead in the eye, and said with a syrupy edge, "Of course. But we're aiming for exceptional, not just okay." The words stung, but it was what followed that made my spine stiffen. She turned to Juniper, ruffled her hair, and said, "Poor Nana. She grew up in a different time. It's not her fault." Then she looked back at me, grinning. "I'm just teasing, Charlotte." I forced a laugh, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was silence. And silence, I was beginning to realize, was dangerous here. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to breathe. The air felt heavier in this house, like every molecule had been assigned a purpose, a direction, a role, and I didn't have one. I was a relic, an extra. the kind of person people tolerate but never invite. I missed my ugly floral couch. I missed butter. I missed the sound of someone snoring beside me in the dark. But most of all, I missed being someone whose presence didn't need explanation or management. I stared at my reflection in the window. The house behind me gleamed like a polished lie. In the glass, I didn't recognize myself. I wasn't sure which was worse. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Delaney had just picked Juniper up from school, and the girl was melting down before dinner. Too much sugar from a birthday cupcake, not enough nap, and all the emotions that come with being 6 and overwhelmed. Delaney's voice was sharp, clipped. "Juniper, go upstairs. Now I'm not dealing with this." Juniper froze, eyes glistening. I stepped in gently. Maybe she just needs a moment. Sometimes, when Griffin got like that, I'd sit him in the kitchen with a cold cloth and a story, just until he caught his breath. I said it softly, kindly, with love. Delaney turned slowly, eyes cold, smile brittle. "Charlotte," she said, voice sugary sweet, "watch your tone in my house." The words dropped like ice into boiling water, sharp, hissing. Griffin was in the next room, but he didn't come. He never did. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. I wasn't. Her smile widened, weaponized. "It's just, you tend to sound a little judgmental when it comes to how we parent. I'm sure you don't mean to." Judgmental. The word curled around my ribs and squeezed. I wanted to scream, to defend, to explain that I had raised the very man she shared a bed with, but I swallowed it, because I knew that tone, the one women use when they want to say, "You're not welcome here," without risking the discomfort of saying it outright. I walked away. Upstairs, in my guest room that still smelled like someone else's detergent, I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. The mirror across from me reflected a woman I didn't recognize. I looked older than I remembered, smaller, almost translucent. Her house, not our house, not even my son's house. Heron, I thought back to my own mother's kitchen, 1967, vinyl floor peeling at the corners, and the smell of fried onions hanging heavy in the air. I was 13, arguing about wearing my brother's old jeans instead of a skirt. She slapped the counter and said, "Don't raise your voice to me. You're a girl. Learn how to speak like one." That lesson stuck. Speak gently, be agreeable, don't provoke, don't confront. Swallow every sharp edge until your insides bleed quietly. I had carried that lesson like a pearl in my mouth for decades, polishing it, making it pretty. Even when I married Edward, I learned to temper myself. If he was tired or tense, I adapted. If I disagreed, I made it sound like a suggestion. I never said no directly. I was a wife who smiled through discomfort, who called it sacrifice instead of disappearance. But now I was being told to watch my tone in a house where I tiptoed every day, and Griffin had heard it. He had to have heard it. He didn't come upstairs, didn't knock, didn't check on me. Instead, I heard the three of them laughing downstairs during dinner, the clink of cutlery, the warm hum of family around a table, without me. The next morning, I opened the jewelry box I'd brought from my old house. Not to wear anything, just to touch something that hadn't yet been edited or curated or judged. The necklace Edward gave me on our 25th anniversary. My mother's ring, a small silver key from a music box long since broken. And beneath the felt lining, something I hadn't seen in years. A letter, yellowing around the edges, folded twice. My name, Charlotte, written in Edward's loopy, slanted hand. I sat down, hands trembling, and read it. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're still living for everyone else, still shrinking to fit someone else's story, then let me say this clearly. Stop. You were meant to be more than someone's afterthought. More than a polite ghost in someone else's home. I didn't always say it, but I saw you. All of you. If the place you live stops feeling like home, then make a new one. You don't owe anyone your silence. Reclaim yourself, Charlotte. I loved you when you were loudest." I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I cried. Not quiet tears, loud ones. The kind that shake your shoulders and wet the collar of your nightgown. The kind you hide behind locked doors because you've been taught that vulnerability is inconvenient. That night, I didn't go down for dinner. I sat on my bed, Edward's letter folded in my hand, and I listened to the sound of them without me. and I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't belong here. Not really, not because I was unwanted, but because I had been taught not to want for myself, not to need space or kindness or autonomy, because the chains I carried weren't visible, but they were real, and they were tightening. Dinner became a ritual of endurance. Delaney cooked most nights, always with flair, always with intention. Roasted root vegetables with balsamic glaze, lentil stuffed peppers, salmon and papillote. The kind of meals that photographed well, but sat dense in the stomach. I used to cook with butter, flavor, heart. My food wasn't pretty, but it fed souls. Hers fed aesthetics. She knew I couldn't eat bell peppers. The acid triggered my reflux, something I'd mentioned more than once. Still, they showed up on my plate 3 times that week. No alternate, no acknowledgement. Just there, staring back at me like a dare. When I quietly picked them out and set them aside, Delaney raised an eyebrow. I thought we were being more adventurous with food, Charlotte. Isn't that what aging gracefully is all about? Griffin chuckled. Mom's always been picky. No one asked if I wanted something else. The light over the dining table was dim, filtered through a frosted globe Delaney insisted gave the room ambience. It left everyone's faces in soft shadow, just enough to blur expressions but not enough to hide the glances. Every eye roll, every smirk was half seen but fully felt. Juniper sat across from me. She was wearing a headband with sparkles and a blue dress with a small ketchup stain on the hem. She picked up her fork and, mimicking her mother's tone almost perfectly, said, "Nana, you're so dramatic. It's just food." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. That high, breezy cadence, that little smirk, that borrowed condescension. At 6 years old, she was already learning which tones carried power and which ones diminished it. And she was learning by watching her mother talk to me. I smiled at her gently. "Sweetheart, it's not drama to ask for something that doesn't make you sick." Juniper shrugged, popping a carrot in her mouth. "Mommy says you complain a lot." My stomach twisted. Delaney said nothing, just reached for her wine glass. Griffin looked uncomfortable, but he didn't correct her. Instead, he changed the subject, to work, to an annoying coworker, to anything else. Later that evening, as I rinsed my plate in the sink, alone because dinner cleanup had somehow become solely my task, Griffin came up behind me. "Hey," he said softly, "you okay?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. "Just a little tired." He leaned on the counter, watching me. "Look, I know you and Delaney are different. She's just very particular about things. It's not personal." I dried my hands. "When your daughter calls me dramatic at the dinner table, that's not personal?" He sighed. "Kids repeat things, you know that." I stared at him, really looked. The lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a year ago, the avoidance in his gaze, the way he folded his arms like a shield. "I'm not a ghost, Griffin. I live here." "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." There it was, the dismissal, the compression of my discomfort into something more manageable, something he didn't have to deal with. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just said, "I miss being asked how my day was." He smiled, tired, sympathetic, practiced. "We're all just adjusting." Adjusting, as if I were a piece of furniture they hadn't figured out where to put yet. Back upstairs, I sat on the bed with the lights off. From here, I could still hear the low murmur of Griffin and Delaney in the kitchen. Laughter, a clink of glasses, and then, very faintly, Juniper's voice again. "Why does Nana act like everything's about her?" I lay back slowly, closed my eyes, and let the silence stretch. That night, I dreamed of my old kitchen, the one Edward and I built together after we finally saved enough. Yellow curtains, chipped tile, the clock that always ran 5 minutes fast, the dog begging at the counter, the sound of forks scraping on real plates, the warmth. It wasn't fancy, but it had room for me. In Delaney's house, I felt like a wrong note in a song someone else was composing. Too sharp, too loud, always off-key. The next morning, there were no apologies, no acknowledgement, just organic oatmeal and black coffee, placed without a word in front of me like an offering or a punishment. And I ate it, because hunger, I'd learned, had many shapes. It was just after 10 when I crept downstairs with my phone tucked into my sweater like contraband. The house was quiet. Delaney in bed early for her Pilates class, Griffin working late from his laptop in their shared office. Juniper was already asleep, her bedroom glowing with the soft hum of a nightlight shaped like a cloud. I stood at the far edge of the porch, screen dimmed, phone clutched to my chest like a prayer. The number still worked. Joanne picked up after the second ring. Charlotte. Her voice, raspy, familiar, sun-warmed, hit me like a hug I didn't know I'd been needing. "Joe," I whispered, "it's been too long." She laughed. "Too long is putting it gently. I thought you'd fallen off the planet." "I might have," I said, "or maybe just into someone else's orbit." She didn't push. She never had. That was Joanne's magic. She let people unfold instead of unzipping them. We talked for 15 minutes about nothing. Her new house in Sedona, the cactus that bloomed too early, a neighbor who played jazz at all hours but had a heart of gold. Then she asked very softly, "So, how are you, Shar?" And I didn't have a real answer. I paused, then said, "I feel erased." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "That's not the woman I knew. You used to fill a room. You used to laugh so loud the neighbors knew you were home." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "I don't think I laugh anymore," I said. "You don't sound like you," she replied gently. "You sound like someone waiting to be allowed to breathe." That line cracked something. I turned, looked at the house behind me, the carefully staged living room with its color-coordinated pillows and art that meant nothing. The windows all dark except the one in the office, where Griffin's silhouette leaned into his glowing screen, untouched and unaware. "I'm not allowed to be anything here," I said. "Not angry, not opinionated, not inconvenient." "You're not a guest, Char," Joanne said. "You're a mother, a human being. Start acting like you belong again." Silence fell between us, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like sitting beside someone on a porch swing in the dark, where the quiet means you're safe. "I've been writing again," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. Joanne's voice lit up. "There she is." I hadn't told anyone. I kept the notebook under my mattress next to Edward's letter. Each night, after the dishes and the dismissals, I wrote. Not essays, not declarations, just bits of myself. A recipe I missed, a memory I'd almost forgotten, a moment from the day that made me ache or smile or wince. It felt like sneaking out for air. And yet, even in those private pages, I was still cautious with my words, still editing myself out of fear someone might read them. But that night on the phone, with Joanne's voice like a lighthouse, I promised myself I'd stop sanding down the edges. "I think I forgot how to take up space," I admitted. Joanne was quiet again, and then she said almost too carefully, "Griffin called me once. About a year after Edward passed." That caught my breath. "He was checking on you," she continued, "but then he started asking about boundaries, about Delaney, said he didn't know how to tell her no, that she made decisions fast and left no room to push back." "What?" I whispered. "He never told me." "He sounded ashamed," she said, like he already knew he'd picked a side and couldn't undo it. I stared out at the street. The wind moved through the trees in slow, rustling waves. A dog barked 3 houses down. My whole body felt like it was floating and sinking at the same time. "He used to be mine," I said, "Griffin," before she rewrote all the rules. Joanne didn't respond. She didn't need to. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the porch until the cold touched my skin and silence wrapped around me, not like a punishment, but a gift. For the first time in months, I wasn't being corrected or excluded or managed. The quiet had room for me. I returned to my room and opened my journal. For the first time, I didn't just write what had happened. I wrote how I felt. Furious, grieved, forgotten, awake. And when I finished, I signed my name at the bottom of the page in bold ink. Charlotte. Not Mom, not Nana, not Charlotte who's in the way. Just me. It started with the box I hadn't unpacked. It sat in the back corner of the guest room closet, one of the last things I'd brought from my old house. I hadn't opened it because I knew what was inside, things that made time stretch and sting. But one afternoon, after Delaney snapped at me for refolding Juniper's laundry the wrong way, I opened it. Not out of rebellion, out of need. Inside were fragments of my former life. A faded photograph of Edward and me on the Oregon coast, both of us squinting in the sun. A chipped ceramic bird Juniper made me when she was 3. Edward's wristwatch, still ticking, though I wasn't sure how. A crocheted doily my mother had made during her final lucid months. I arranged them carefully on the top of the small dresser. No more than a square foot of space. A modest corner. A tether to self. The photo went in a wooden frame. The watch sat beside it. I placed the doily beneath the ceramic bird, which wobbled slightly but stood proud. When I stepped back, it didn't look like much. But the room changed. It felt different, warmer, more mine. I sat down and looked at it for a long while. It didn't ask for approval. It simply was. For the first time in months, something in this house belonged to me. Delaney noticed 3 days later. She knocked, uncharacteristic, and stepped in without waiting. Her eyes went straight to the dresser. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "What's all this?" I didn't rise. Just memories. She walked over, tilted her head at the photo. It's just that the guest room is kind of a shared space, you know? I've worked hard to keep a consistent aesthetic. Minimalist, clean lines." I waited. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. She looked again at the little setup, and this time, the smile didn't come back. "Would you mind boxing those things up? Just while we're having people over this weekend. First impressions and all that." There was no explosion, no dramatic refusal, just silence. I nodded once. Of course. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of Edward. His eyes, always a little too earnest for the camera, seemed to ask me something I didn't want to answer. I picked up the frame, held it against my chest. Then, gently, like laying a child to sleep, I placed it back in the box. The ceramic bird followed, then the watch, the doily folded softly. I reached for the mirror on the closet door and pulled a scarf over it. I didn't want to see my face just then. It looked too much like surrender. As I pushed the box back into the closet, I heard the soft thump of small feet in the hallway. Juniper stood at the door, still in her pink socks, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. "Nana?" she asked, blinking. "Why are you always so sad?" I froze. Her voice wasn't mocking this time. It wasn't borrowed from Delaney or filtered through someone else's judgment. It was hers. Honest, observant, curious. I sat back down and motioned for her to come in. She climbed onto the bed beside me, rabbit tucked under her arm. "I'm not always sad," I said softly. "Sometimes I just miss things that don't fit here." She tilted her head. "Like what?" I pointed to the box. "Like memories, people who aren't here anymore, places that used to feel like mine." She thought about that. "Mommy says you don't like anything." I swallowed. "That's not true. I just don't like being invisible." Juniper leaned against me, head on my shoulder. "You're not invisible." I smiled, even though it trembled. "Thanks, sweetheart." She stayed for a while, quiet. I didn't rush her out. We just sat in the half-lit room, a shared silence that didn't sting. After she left, I looked at the scarf-covered mirror again, and I thought, maybe it's not that I'm sad. Maybe it's that this version of me isn't real. Maybe sadness is just what I look like when I'm being erased. That night, I wrote in my journal again, longer this time, less careful, less censored. I wrote about the memory room, about how even a single photo can become too much for someone else's version of perfection. I wrote about how Edward's smile in that picture held more comfort than this whole house. I ended the entry with a single sentence. I boxed myself up today, and I knew next time I opened that box, it wouldn't be quietly. It started with the books. Not many, just a few paperbacks I'd kept tucked in the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Titles I used to read when I needed to remember how it felt to have a voice or a spine. Beloved, The Color Purple, My Antonia. I stacked them in a small box, lined the bottom with an old scarf, and wrote Charlotte's in pencil on the side. It wasn't a plan, it was preservation, a quiet ritual of reclaiming the parts of me that still existed. By the end of the week, 3 boxes sat along the wall. One with books, one with clothes I hadn't worn since moving in, skirts that felt too bold for this sterile house. The third held framed photographs, mostly of Edward and me. Our anniversary in Nashville, a blurry shot of Griffin on the beach as a boy, arms out like wings. A printed photo of Juniper's kindergarten graduation. One Delaney hadn't hung. I wasn't moving, but I needed to know I could. Each time I closed a box, I felt something shift. A slow loosening, like I was removing bricks from a wall that had quietly built itself around me. In the quiet of my room, I spoke aloud sometimes, pretending Edward could still hear me. I kept quiet too long, I told the air. In my childhood home when Mama slapped me for speaking my mind. In our marriage when I smiled through things that cut me in half. And now here, in this house, with your son. Griffin came by that night, knocked once, then stepped in. "Packing already?" he asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. "No," I said simply. "Just organizing." He looked at the boxes. He didn't ask what was inside. He never asked the right questions. "You know Delaney worries about clutter," he said carefully, as if I were a dog that might bite. "She likes things clean, streamlined." "I know," I replied, watching him. He shifted his weight. "She's been trying, you know. It's just hard for her to have another adult in the house. Different routines, different standards." I let the silence answer him. He tried again. "She's always trying to make things nice for everyone. That's her way of showing love." "No," I said gently. "It's her way of maintaining control." He bristled. "You're not being fair. And you're not being honest." He didn't stay long after that. The next morning over coffee, Delaney stood across from me in the kitchen and smiled thinly. "I noticed you've been organizing things," she said. I nodded, saying nothing. She poured almond milk into her mug, stirred slowly. "I hope you know we're doing everything we can to make this arrangement comfortable. It's not easy, especially with only so much space." I waited, then she said it. "You know, rent-free." It was wrapped in gratitude, delivered with civility, but the knife still landed. "I've never tried to be a burden," I said softly. "Oh, of course not, but it's important to name things, keep things transparent." I thought about all the meals I'd cooked, the dishes I'd washed, the towels I'd folded, the hours I'd babysat so she could get her nails done or make meetings or do yoga, invisible labor, love wrapped in service, never tallied. I went upstairs, opened another box. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I folded a sweater I hadn't worn since Edward's funeral and whispered, "You would have hated this, Ed. You would have told her where to put that mug." That night, I was walking past the half-open office when I heard her voice. I wasn't eavesdropping. The door was open and the words came out clean and clipped. "Yes," Delaney was saying, "the house shows well. Open layout, neutral palette. The guest room could be staged as an office or a nursery. We just have to remove some of the problematic variables first." My heart stopped. There was a pause, then a dry laugh. "She's sweet, sure, but it's not her house. She knows that. She'll understand." I stepped away before she could hear my breath catch. Problematic variables. That's what I'd become. Not a mother, not a helper, not a person. Just a box to be moved. Griffin came home late that night. I waited in the kitchen, a single lamp on, its soft glow painting long shadows across the counter. I had poured 2 glasses of water. Not wine, not tea. Water felt neutral, unprovoking, plain. It felt like him. He didn't notice I was waiting until he rounded the corner, keys still in hand. His eyes registered surprise, then settled into weariness. "Hey," he said, "you're up." I nodded, just wanted a word. He set his keys down slowly. "Sure, everything okay?" A practiced question, not an invitation. I gestured to the stool across from me. He sat reluctantly. I didn't start with the Realtor. I started with the silence. "I heard Delaney on the phone," I said quietly. "Talking about the house, about, staging the guest room, removing problematic variables." His shoulders stiffened. He didn't meet my eyes. You knew, I said. A pause. Then, we were going to talk to you. It wasn't decided yet. But it's what you want. He inhaled through his nose, rubbed the back of his neck. It's complicated, Mom. I tilted my head. Is it? Another long pause. Finally, he said it. It's for the best, Mom. There it was. A sentence so soft it could almost be mistaken for kindness, but it held the weight of an eviction notice. I see, I said. He rushed to fill the silence. It's just the tension. Delaney's been walking on eggshells. Juniper's picking up on things. You're clearly not happy here, and we're trying, but it feels like I'm the problem. I finished for him. He looked down at the glass of water. Didn't answer. I've spent the last few months shrinking myself, I said, trying not to take up too much space, not to speak too loudly, not to step out of line, and you're telling me that's not enough. I'm not saying that, he said. I'm just saying maybe this wasn't a good fit. This isn't a job interview, Griffin. I'm not a couch you regret buying. He flinched, just barely. Don't make this a thing. It is a thing, I snapped, then caught myself, took a breath. I heard your wife call me a variable, and I'm watching you pretend like that's not cruel. He leaned forward, suddenly defensive. Delaney's trying to manage a lot. This house, Juniper, her work. It's not easy adding another person into the mix. I'm your mother, I said, not a stray dog. He sighed. You're being overly sensitive. That line landed like a slap. I'm being sensitive, I repeated, quieter now. Not hurt, not erased, just sensitive. He looked at me finally. His eyes were tired, hollow. I can't keep being the middleman. You're not in the middle, I said. You've picked a side. You just don't want to admit it. His silence said everything. We sat there in the kitchen, the clock ticking behind us, the kind of silence that doesn't settle, only thickens. Do you remember, I said slowly, when you were 15 and you crashed the Volvo? You called me before you called your father, because you said you wouldn't yell, you'd just help. He looked down again. I never yelled. Not when you lied, not when you failed, not even when you hurt me. He blinked, swallowed. And now, I continued, I'm asking for basic kindness and you call it conflict. He looked at me finally, but the words that came next weren't his best. I think you've always needed people to revolve around you, Mom, and maybe this isn't that. The glass in my hand trembled. That's not true, I whispered. I just wanted to belong. He stood slowly. Maybe some space will help everyone. He left before I could respond. Back in my room, I sat on the bed, stunned by how quiet the world had gone, as if the air had been sucked out of the house, as if sound had gone brittle. I reached for my journal, but I didn't write. Not yet. Instead, I opened the closet and pulled out the first box. This time, I didn't open it with nostalgia. This time, I opened it with purpose, because it wasn't just packing anymore. It was preparing. The morning of the visit, I wore my nightgown on purpose. Not a frumpy robe or something apologetically beige. My pale blue cotton nightgown with lace at the collar, the one Edward used to call elegantly dangerous. I added a soft cardigan, kept my hair unbrushed, left my slippers on. Delaney hated when I looked undone. I carried my tea to the living room and sat down on the white couch, the one with the designer throw pillow that was strictly decorative. I settled right in, careful not to spill a drop. I had just placed the saucer on the armrest when the doorbell rang. Delaney practically sprinted to answer it. Hi, you must be Miranda, she chirped, all teeth and polish. Come in. We're so excited to get your input. The realtor entered like she owned the air in the room. Tall, blonde, in sharp black trousers and heels that didn't flinch on hardwood. Her eyes scanned the space in a trained, transactional rhythm. Lovely space, Miranda said. Very light, clean, definitely a modern appeal. Buyers love open flow. Delaney beamed, proud like she'd just birthed the architecture herself. I sipped my tea. Miranda's gaze finally landed on me. And this must be Charlotte. Delaney said quickly with a strained smile. My mother-in-law, she's visiting for a bit. Visiting, I nodded. I live here, I said, just loud enough. Miranda gave a tight smile. Ah, I see. She walked through the rooms with Delaney practically dancing behind her. I stayed where I was, letting the voices echo through the hall. When they returned to the living room, Miranda perched on the edge of a chair, took out her tablet. So, let's talk timeline. You mentioned you wanted to be market ready within 3 weeks? Delaney nodded eagerly. Yes, we'd like to close fast, less disruption. Miranda tapped a few notes, then she looked at me. Charlotte, was it? How do you feel about the sale? Delaney shifted uncomfortably. I took a sip of tea. Well, I said, soft but steady, I've always liked this house. It's the only place my granddaughter's ever known. Hard to imagine it not being ours anymore. Miranda blinked. Yours? I met her gaze, unflinching. My husband and I co-signed the mortgage when Griffin and Delaney got married. The deed still has my name. Delaney's breath caught audibly. Miranda raised her eyebrows just slightly, then resumed typing. Well, she said after a pause, you seem very attached to the place. I smiled, only to what it represents. Miranda stood. I'll email you both the initial comps and draft timeline by tomorrow, but this is definitely a desirable space. If we position it right, you'll have buyers lining up. Delaney escorted her out, her voice bright but brittle. When the door closed, she turned to me, her face tight. That wasn't helpful, she snapped. I looked up from my tea. Neither is pretending I don't exist. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her jaw flexed. Then she walked away without another word. That afternoon, I called Joanne. She came, I said. The realtor? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It was like watching someone shop for my body before I was even dead. There was a pause on her end, then, so, you gonna let them sell it out from under you? I already contacted someone, I said, a different realtor. Her name's on a card tucked behind the mirror in my closet. Joanne let out a slow, proud exhale. You really are still in there. I never left, I said. I just went quiet. I remembered the pen. It had been one of those free promotional ones from the bank, blue plastic, half-dried ink. Griffin had joked about it when we sat across from the notary, his hand steady as he signed next to mine. We were giving them the house. Not the money, they had that from their own jobs, but the credit, the leverage, the chance to step into adulthood with a head start. We'll put you on the deed too, he'd said, just until we refinance later. I never pushed him to do it, not even after Edward died and I moved in, but I'd kept the papers. After the realtor left, I dug out the manila folder from the bottom of my travel trunk, the one I hadn't opened since the move. The title was there, crisp, clear, my name first, his second, not a co-signer, a co-owner. I called the other realtor the next morning, Marianne Clay, an older woman with kind eyes and a voice like warm gravel. I told her everything. She didn't blink. Well, you're not legally required to get their permission, she said calmly. It's your property. If they're not on the title, you're within your rights to sell your share or negotiate a sale outright. The words felt like fresh air after weeks of stale confinement. But I don't want a war, I said. Then don't make it one, she replied. Make it a beginning. For the first time in months, I slept with the window open. That weekend, I started looking at listings, not luxury condos or sparkling new developments, just modest places, bungalows, cottages, spaces with crooked doorways and quirks that hadn't been polished away. I found one in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes outside the city. It had peeling paint on the shutters and a front porch with just enough room for a rocking chair. Inside, the kitchen counters were scratched and the tiles didn't match, but the window seat in the living room looked out over a wild, tangled backyard. I walked outside while the realtor unlocked the back door, and there, past the overgrown grass and broken fence, I saw them. Wildflowers. Messy, vivid, real. They hadn't been planted by intention, but they had grown anyway. Defiant, unruly, alive. I thought of myself. Not the version Delaney curated, not the one Griffin tolerated, the woman Edward married, the girl who used to read poetry aloud in bookstores. the mother who built forts out of blankets and who once chased her son through sprinklers on a dare. This was her space, not perfect, not polished, but hers. That evening, back in the house that no longer felt like anything but a waiting room, I ran my fingers along the edge of the couch, Delaney's couch. I didn't sit down, I just looked at it. So sterile, so guarded. I returned to my room and opened the journal. I saw a house today. The porch creaked, the wallpaper peeled, but the floors remembered footsteps. I think it might be the kind of place that remembers people. I stared at the words, then I added, "It's not about finding home again, it's about choosing one." I waited until the documents were signed, not out of fear, out of finality. Marianne had called that morning to confirm the sale. The buyer, a retired couple from Vermont, had fallen in love with the open floor plan and the potential for expansion. The closing was set for 30 days. I told Griffin and Delaney over dinner, not because I wanted to ruin a meal, but because there was no perfect time to blow up a fantasy. We were eating grilled chicken and couscous. Juniper was humming softly, legs swinging under the table. "I sold the house," I said quietly. The hum stopped. Forks paused midair. Griffin blinked. "What?" Delaney stared. "You what?" "I contacted a realtor," I said. "I signed the documents yesterday. The house is in escrow." Delaney's chair scraped backward. "You can't just, this is our home." "No," I said calmly. "It was ours. Legally, it's still mine. Emotionally, it stopped being home months ago." Griffin's voice cracked. "Mom, come on, this is extreme." "No," I said again, "this is necessary." Delaney's voice rose, brittle and biting. "You're being vindictive." "Over what? Some imagined slight? Because we didn't grovel at your feet?" I set down my fork. "Because I've been spoken to like I'm an intrusion in a space I helped create. Because I've been told to watch my tone, to box up my memories, to stop being so sensitive. Because I've been asked to disappear quietly," she scoffed. "You're ungrateful." That word, it was the same one my mother used when I cried instead of smiling. The same one Edward's sisters used when I stopped coming to Sunday dinners. The same one Delaney used now like a blade hidden in a bouquet. I stood slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just certain. "I gave you this house," I said. "I gave you space. I gave you silence. I am not ungrateful. I am finished." Griffin stood too, his hands shaking slightly. "Wait, just wait, we can talk about this." "Now you want to talk?" I asked. He moved around the table, desperation seeping through. "Mom, I didn't know how to make you happy. I tried. Delaney tried. We were doing our best." I looked at him, and the ache in my chest was real, but it didn't control me anymore. "It was never your job to make me happy," I said gently. "It was your job not to let me be erased." He went still. "I was your mother before she was your wife," I said, the words low and level. "But you treated me like an inconvenience you inherited." Delaney crossed her arms. "This is insane." "No," I said. "It's clarity." Juniper had gone quiet. Her eyes darted between us, small and unsure. "I'll be out before closing," I added, turning toward the hallway. "I've already found somewhere else." Delaney's voice cracked behind me. "Well, good. I hope you're very happy in your little corner of bitterness." I didn't answer. In my room, I closed the door gently, not a slam, just a boundary. I began packing again, not protectively this time, but with purpose. My boxes were neat, labeled, orderly. I wrapped Edward's watch in tissue paper, folded my sweaters, taped the lid on the journal box with care. As I reached for the drawer, I noticed something tucked inside the flap of my weekender bag, a folded piece of construction paper. I opened it slowly, crayons, lopsided figures, me and Juniper, holding hands, standing in front of a little yellow house, green grass, a big tree, a swing, scrawled in her careful, uneven handwriting, "Real family." I sat on the bed and let the tears come. Not from regret, not from sorrow, from recognition. Someone had seen me. The key was heavier than I expected. It fit into the lock with a soft click, and when I turned the handle and stepped inside, the door didn't creak. It sighed. Like the house had been waiting too. The living room was small, but it smelled like dust and promise. Morning light streamed through the east-facing windows, warming the hardwood floor in golden streaks. The window seat was smaller than I remembered from the listing photos, but the way the sun hit it mid-morning made me imagine curling up there with a blanket and a book, feet tucked beneath me, the world kept at bay. I left my bags by the door. There was no one to show me around, no one to perform for. Just me and the space. In the kitchen, the counters were scratched in familiar ways, cooked-on stories waiting to be added to. A single vase sat in the middle of the counter. I'd brought it with me, wrapped in towels. I filled it with fresh tulips from the small corner market on the way in, orange, yellow, and one rogue purple bloom. It looked perfect in the window. I didn't unpack everything at once. Instead, I let the house meet me slowly. A photo here, a favorite mug there. My wind chime, shaped like copper leaves, now hung on the porch. It caught the breeze with a delicate whisper. Nothing intrusive, just a gentle hello. I placed a cozy armchair by the window and angled it just so where the sun lingered in the afternoons. The cushion sighed when I sat down for the first time, like it already knew me. I'd picked up a library card the week before the move. The branch was 5 blocks away, tucked between a coffee shop and a consignment store. On my second visit, I saw a flyer for volunteers and signed up without hesitation. 3 days a week now, I shelve books, tidy the children's section, and help older patrons navigate the computer catalog. There's something sacred about putting books back where they belong, something healing. After my second week, the librarian, a tall, soft-spoken man named Elias, invited me to join the Tuesday reading hour. I said yes. I read to wide-eyed children with messy braids and sticky fingers, voices wrapped in wonder, and no one told me to watch my tone. At night, I write, not because I'm lonely, but because the silence is finally mine. The house creaks and settles around me, but it doesn't feel heavy. It feels like companionship, like breathing. I've started journaling again, not as an escape, but as a record, a way of saying, I was here, I mattered, I chose this. Tonight I wrote by candlelight, the breeze moving through the screen door, the wind chimes softly marking time. Today, a little girl in story hour asked me if I was a grandma. I said yes. Then she asked if I had a favorite story. I told her it was still being written. I paused, then signed the page. Charlotte. Not Mom, not Nana, not Charlotte who stays quiet, just me. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. There was a time when silence felt like safety. As a child, I learned to speak softly so I wouldn't provoke my mother's temper. As a wife, I lowered my voice to soothe Edward's pride when he came home tense from work. And as a guest, because I see it clearly now, that's what I was. I swallowed my words daily in a house that was never mine. I mistook endurance for grace. I believed being palatable was the same as being kind. But silence, I've come to understand, is not always peace. Sometimes it's a prison built out of politeness. And now that I've reclaimed space, voice, and breath, I know solitude isn't silence. It's sanctuary. It's the choice to sit in your own skin and say, I am allowed to be whole here. The first few weeks in the new house, I caught myself waiting for criticism that never came. I hesitated before placing a book on the kitchen table, expecting someone to remind me it didn't belong. I closed cabinet doors quietly, reflexively apologetic, but no one scolded. No one sighed or shifted or corrected. The only voice I heard was my own, and I liked her more than I expected. She was gentle but not weak. She remembered things clearly now. She forgave slowly and with care, and she had something to say. I began collecting small moments like treasures, the way the sun spilled across the floor every morning at 9:10 sharp, the birds that nested in the crooked tree out back and sang their approval without asking for permission, the boy from next door who waved to me each afternoon as he rode past on his scooter. Each fragment of life here was mine, not borrowed, not contingent. The porch became my favorite place to think. It faced west, and the evenings were golden, soft light catching the rim of my coffee cup, the wind chime offering its quiet applause. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I just listened to the air. Sometimes I wrote letters I never sent. One was to Griffin. It was full of things I never said out loud and probably never will. Not because he doesn't deserve them, but because I no longer need to bleed to prove I was wounded. Forgiveness is quieter than I thought it would be. It's not a grand gesture. It's the decision to stop carrying something heavy. I don't know what Juniper was told after I left. Maybe that Nana needed space. Maybe that Nana was tired. But the truth is, I didn't leave them. I returned to myself. I still have her drawing tucked into the journal. Real family. I look at it sometimes and think, maybe that's what I've finally become. Real. Not for someone else. Not under their gaze. Just me, in my own light, in my own time. Last week, I found the old Realtor's card, the one Delaney's agent left behind after her tour of the house. It had fallen behind a drawer, wedged against the baseboard. I took it outside, set it in a ceramic bowl I use for matches and sage, watched it curl and blacken, the ink turning to smoke. I didn't film it, didn't photograph it. I just watched, because that's the tone I choose now, not loud, not bitter, but true. I sipped my coffee, leaned back in my chair, and let the wind chime play its quiet refrain. They wanted me to watch my tone. So I watched everything I'd ever silenced burn and smiled. Ever felt like the quiet one at someone else's table? Then you know this story, because maybe it's a little bit yours too. We're not done telling the truths that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Subscribe to stay with the stories that don't just speak, they unfold, because some voices don't echo.